You think expression is freedom and restraint is suppression. That belief is already a mistake. The conflict is not between speaking and holding back. It is between reacting and choosing. The mind tells itself that expression is honesty, that restraint is denial. But this is only an unexamined judgment. What you call expression is often immediate assent. An impression appears, anger, irritation, excitement, and you agree with it too quickly. You let it speak through you. Not because it must, but because you did not stop it. Restraint is not silence. It is refusal. It is the moment where you see the impression and do not submit. The disturbance is not that something arose inside you. The disturbance is that you endorsed it without inspection. You are not torn between expression and restraint. You are failing to govern assent. Examine what you approve before it becomes action. You treat expression as something that belongs to you, as if whatever rises inside must be released to remain honest. That assumption is already misplaced. What belongs to you is not the impulse. It is your response to it. A thought appears. A surge follows, anger in a conversation, irritation in delay, excitement in praise. These arrive without your permission. They are impressions. They do not ask whether you approve. They present themselves. This part is not yours to control. But what follows is yours. When someone interrupts you and you feel the immediate urge to cut them off, that urge is not yet action. It is only an appearance. The mistake begins when you treat that appearance as authority. When you assume that because it feels strong, it must be expressed. That is where ownership is confused. Expression is often defended as authenticity. But authenticity does not mean obedience to impulse. If it did, every reaction would be justified simply by its intensity. That would leave no room for judgment, no space for discipline, no distinction between a passing impression and a chosen act. Restraint is misunderstood for the same reason. It is seen as suppression, as if something true is being buried. But what is actually being restrained is not truth. It is premature agreement. It is the decision to let the impression pass through unchecked. Consider a moment of frustration at work. A message arrives that feels dismissive. The immediate reaction is to respond sharply. The words form quickly. You feel the need to send them. If you do, you call it expression. If you pause, you call it restraint. But the real distinction is elsewhere. The message did not force your reply. The feeling did not compel your words. The decisive moment was when you agreed with the impression that this deserves an immediate response. That agreement turned impulse into action. Without that agreement, nothing moves. This is the boundary. Not between silence and speech, but between impression and assent. You do not control what appears in the mind. You control what you allow to proceed. When this boundary is ignored, life becomes reactive. You begin to live as if every internal movement demands external expression. You feel justified in every outburst, every interruption, every impulsive decision. And when consequences follow, they appear as external problems rather than results of mislocated authority. But when the boundary is clear, something changes. The appearance still arrives. The emotion still rises. But there is a gap. And in that gap, ownership becomes visible. You are not responsible for the arrival. You are responsible for the endorsement. Expression without examination is not freedom. It is submission to whatever appears strongest in the moment. Restraint is not silence forced from the outside. It is the refusal to grant authority too quickly. This distinction does not yet explain why the mind agrees so fast. It only shows where the mistake happens. To understand that, the inner mechanism must be examined. The disturbance does not begin when you speak. It begins earlier, where you stop noticing. An impression arrives. Someone criticizes you. The words land. Immediately, a meaning attaches. This is disrespect. That meaning is not yet chosen, but it feels complete. The mind does not pause to examine it. It moves forward as if the interpretation were already confirmed. This is the first shift. The impression becomes a judgment. Then something else happens. You do not simply notice the judgment, you agree with it. Quietly, almost instantly, you endorse the thought, yes, this is an offense. It should not happen. That agreement is assent. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. But it is decisive. Once assent is given, the rest follows without resistance. Now the reaction feels justified. The sharp reply, the change in tone, the tension in the body, all of it appears necessary. Not because the event forced it, but because the mind has already approved the interpretation behind it. This is why expression feels unavoidable. You are not reacting to the event. You are acting on a judgment you have already accepted. If the process is not seen, it collapses into one movement. It feels like event-reaction. But the missing steps are what matter. Impression, interpretation, assent, action. The speed hides the structure. The speed convinces you there was no choice. Consider a simple case. You send a message. There is no reply for hours. An impression appears, absence. Then an interpretation forms, they are ignoring me. Without examination, you assent. You agree that this silence means rejection or disrespect. From there, the reaction builds, frustration, doubt, maybe another message sent with tension behind it. But nothing in the original event required that chain. The delay did not contain the meaning. The meaning was added. And more importantly, it was approved. This approval is the turning point. Without it, the interpretation remains provisional. It does not command action. With it, the interpretation becomes authority. Most people do not notice this moment because it is brief. It feels automatic. But automatic does not mean necessary. It only means unexamined. You say you had to express it. But what you mean is that you had already agreed with the thought that demanded expression. This is why restraint feels difficult. Not because silence is hard, but because you are trying to stop at the wrong stage. You attempt to control the final action while leaving the earlier assent untouched. By the time you reach the level of speech, the decision has already been made internally. Restraint at the level of words is late. The work begins earlier. If you interrupt the process before assent, the structure changes. The impression still arrives. The interpretation still suggests itself. But instead of agreement, there is examination. A pause. A question, is this true, or does it only appear so? That hesitation weakens the authority of the impression. It prevents the automatic chain from completing. Now expression becomes optional. Without assent, there is no compulsion to act. There is only a possibility to choose. The problem is not that impressions are strong. The problem is that agreement is given too quickly. Understanding this mechanism clarifies where discipline must be applied. But understanding alone does not produce it. That requires training. Understanding the mechanism does not correct it. The mind does not slow down simply because you can describe what it does. Discipline is not explanation. It is training. You do not wait for the next moment of anger to decide how you will respond. By then, the impression has already taken shape, the interpretation is forming, and assent is close behind. If there has been no prior training, the mind will follow its usual path. It will agree quickly. It will justify the reaction. It will repeat the pattern. Discipline begins before the moment of pressure. It is built in smaller, less visible situations. In the ordinary moments where the stakes feel low but the structure is the same. You notice a minor irritation. Someone speaks longer than expected. A plan shifts slightly. These are not dramatic events, but they carry the same sequence: impression, interpretation, possible assent. This is where training happens. Instead of allowing the mind to agree automatically, you interrupt the sequence. Not by force, but by attention. You recognize the impression as an appearance, not a verdict. You delay agreement. You create a small separation between what is presented and what is accepted. At first, this feels unnatural. The habit of quick assent is strong. The mind prefers speed. It prefers certainty. It wants to resolve the impression immediately by deciding what it means. Discipline resists that impulse. It does not rush to replace one judgment with another. It holds the space open. Consider a simple situation. You receive feedback that feels unfair. The immediate thought appears, "This is wrong." Without training, you assent. You defend. You react. With training, the process changes slightly. The thought still appears, but you do not grant it authority at once. You examine it. You ask whether the impression is accurate or only compelling. This pause is the exercise. It is not dramatic. It does not remove the feeling. It prevents the feeling from becoming command. Many mistake discipline for suppression. They imagine that Stoic practice means pushing reactions down or denying their presence. That is not the function. The reaction is allowed to appear. What is withheld is agreement. You do not silence the impression. You refuse to submit to it without examination. Over time, this repetition alters the pattern. The mind becomes less eager to conclude. It becomes more accustomed to waiting. The interval between impression and assent widens. And in that interval, choice becomes more available. Discipline is not tested in rare moments of intensity. It is formed in repeated, ordinary corrections. If you only attempt restraint when the pressure is high, you will fail. Not because restraint is impossible, but because the habit of assent has already been reinforced in smaller moments. The larger moment only exposes what has been practiced. Training is not about becoming rigid. It is about becoming precise. You do not aim to eliminate reaction. You aim to govern what you agree with. This is why discipline must be continuous. It cannot be applied selectively. Each unexamined assent strengthens the pattern. Each examined impression weakens it. You are not building resistance to expression. You are building control over endorsement. And when that control becomes stable, the need for forced restraint decreases. Because fewer impressions are allowed to pass into action without inspection. But training is not complete when it is understood or even repeated. It must become visible in how you move through daily situations. That is where it is tested and confirmed. The practice is not abstract. It happens in the exact moments you usually ignore. When a notification appears and your attention shifts immediately, that is an impression. The impulse to check it feels harmless. You reach for the device without hesitation. That is assent. You did not decide. You agreed too quickly. Change the sequence. When the notification appears, do nothing for a moment. Notice the pull. Do not label it as good or bad. Simply refuse to act immediately. This is not about discipline in the sense of denial. It is the act of seeing the impression without granting it command. After a few seconds, you may still choose to check it. But now it is chosen, not automatic. The structure is simple: impression arrives, pause, examine, then decide. Apply the same in conversation. Someone says something that feels dismissive. The reaction forms quickly. The urge to interrupt or defend appears. Instead of speaking, remain silent for a brief interval. Not as suppression, but as inspection. Ask internally, what am I agreeing with right now? Often, you will find a hidden judgment: this is disrespect, or I am being undermined. That judgment is not yet proven. It only feels convincing. If you do not assent, the urgency weakens. Your response, if it comes, will be different. Slower. More precise. Sometimes unnecessary. Another situation. You are waiting. A delay occurs. The mind produces irritation. It says, "This should not be happening." That statement is not part of the event. it is added. If you accept it, frustration follows. If you question it, the experience changes. The delay remains, but the pressure does not build in the same way. The practice here is direct. When the thought "this should not be happening" appears, do not accept it immediately. Replace nothing. Simply hold it in view without agreement. The mind will attempt to close the gap quickly. It prefers resolution. You interrupt that preference. This is repeatable. Not in theory, but in sequence. When X happens, do not assent immediately. When the impression forms, name it as appearance. When urgency rises, delay action briefly. These are not techniques to improve mood. They are corrections applied at the point of agreement. Even after you fail, the practice continues. You react too quickly. You send the message. You speak sharply. The event is over, but the process can still be examined. Trace it back. Where did assent occur? What was agreed to without inspection? This is not for self-condemnation. It is to make the mechanism visible. Without this review, the same pattern repeats without awareness. There is no need to create special conditions for this work. It exists in routine interactions. Waiting in line. Receiving a message. Hearing a tone of voice. Each moment carries the same structure. Each moment offers the same point of intervention. The goal is not to become slow in all things. It is to become deliberate where agreement matters. As this practice stabilizes, something shifts. You no longer rely on holding words back at the last second. You intervene earlier. At the level of assent, fewer impulses reach the stage of expression. Not because they are suppressed, but because they are never approved. This is where restraint stops feeling like effort. And when restraint no longer depends on effort, the question of expression changes entirely. Freedom is not found in saying everything you feel, nor in holding everything back. Both positions depend on something outside your control. If you believe expression defines freedom, then you are dependent on impulse. Whatever appears inside you becomes your master. You must speak it, act on it, release it. You call this honesty, but it is obedience to whatever arises. If you believe restraint defines control, then you are still reacting to the same impulse. You are resisting it, but it still dictates your position. Silence becomes a reaction, not a choice. You are still governed by what appears. In both cases, authority is misplaced. Freedom begins when neither expression nor restraint is the primary concern. The concern shifts to something earlier. What you approve. What you allow to take form as action. When assent is governed, expression becomes precise. You speak when it aligns with judgment, not when it is triggered by impulse. Restraint becomes unnecessary as a defensive act, because fewer impressions reach the stage where they must be held back. Consider a situation where criticism is directed at you. Without discipline, you either respond immediately or force yourself to remain silent while tension builds. Both are forms of reaction. With discipline, something else happens. The impression appears. The interpretation forms. But you do not grant it authority without examination. The urgency dissolves. Now, if you speak, it is not because you had to. It is because you chose to. This is a different kind of control. It does not depend on suppression. It does not rely on release. It depends on governance. Freedom, then, is not the absence of impulse. It is the reduction of its power to command. External conditions remain unchanged. People still speak. Delays still occur. Impressions still arise. But the chain does not complete itself automatically. The ruling faculty remains involved. It does not surrender at the first appearance. This kind of freedom is not visible in dramatic ways. It does not announce itself. It is seen in what does not happen. In the reaction that never forms. In the word that is never spoken because it was never approved. It must also be maintained. There is no final point where the work ends. Impressions continue. The mind continues to generate interpretations. The possibility of quick assent remains. Freedom is sustained through continued attention to that process. If this attention weakens, the old pattern returns. Expression becomes impulsive again. Restraint becomes forced again. The same confusion reappears. So freedom is not a state you reach. It is a condition you maintain through ongoing correction. You are not free because you can express everything. You are not free because you can hold everything in. You are free to the extent that you do not surrender assent without examination. Nothing outside you grants this. Nothing outside you removes it. This is the limit of control. And the center of it. The conflict was never between speaking and staying silent. It was between agreement and examination. Expression feels urgent when assent has already been given. Restraint feels difficult when the same assent remains active beneath the surface. In both cases, the error is not in what you do outwardly, but in what you approved inwardly. The mind accepts an impression as true, necessary, or justified, and everything that follows appears inevitable. But nothing in that chain is inevitable. The impression arrives. That is not yours. The interpretation presents itself. That is not yet binding. The moment that matters is when you agree. When you allow the impression to define reality without inspection. That is where responsibility begins. And that is where it can be corrected. If this point is ignored, you will continue to alternate between reaction and resistance. Between saying too much and holding too tightly. Both will feel like effort. Both will feel like loss of control. But when this point is governed, the structure changes. You no longer measure yourself by how much you express or how much you restrain. You measure by what you allow to become action. By what you consent to. Nothing external can perform this work for you. No situation removes the need for it. No outcome guarantees it. The ruling faculty either examines or it submits. So the question is not whether to express or to restrain. It is whether you will examine what you are about to approve. Return to what is yours to govern.